Imagine being a child, hiding in the dark corners of your own home, afraid not just of monsters under your bed, but of the very faith that was supposed to protect you. In 2011, The Binding of Isaac transformed that fear into one of the most unsettling and unforgettable games of its era. Born from Edmund McMillen's religious upbringing and twisted through the lens of his grotesque art, Isaac wasn't just another indie dungeon crawler. It was a raw personal story about guilt, trauma, and survival. Developed in Flash with programmer Florian Himsl, the game blended Zelda-inspired exploration with the unpredictability of roguelites, creating a basement that was never the same twice. Every item reshaped Isaac's body, every run told a new story, and every death invited players to try again. What began as a 2-week game experiment soon spiraled into a decade-long journey of expansions, remakes, and reinventions, fueled as much by its passionate community as by its creators. Today, we're venturing back into that basement to uncover how a crude little Flash project became one of the most influential indie games of all time. So steel your nerves, light a candle, and join us for today's dark and thought-provoking trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 266th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby, video games, a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we're delving into The Binding of Isaac, the 2011 roguelike dungeon crawler that mixed dark themes with addictive gameplay. With its procedurally generated levels and endless replayability, this indie gem has become a staple in gaming history. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who'd probably spend all his coins on slot machines instead of power-ups. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, do you think you could survive the basement, or you kind of just gonna keep running around in circles trying to dodge the enemies until you fail?
I'm probably just going to keep running in circles if it's anything like most of these style games, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, that's my go-to.
You don't play a lot of these style games,
No, I do not, Dave.
which is... You like a challenge, but you don't like 2D, really.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, there's some 2D things that I enjoy, but the list is not as large.
Because like we were talking recently last week even, because I'm playing Silk Song right now, which is notoriously difficult, and you don't like platformers, so it's not
Right.
really on your radar at all.
No, it's fun to watch. I have been watching a friend play it, guest on our show, actually, Kiefer.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's not for me. Watching him play, I'm just reminded that it's not really for me.
But it's pattern recognition, which is what you like about Dark Souls.
Yes, I don't get me wrong. It's the style of game in the terms of like the way that you play. But platformers I feel are also different. It's not like, there's very limited movement options. Um, and you're kind of just stuck in it.
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know what it is. Just something about it I never really got into. Like, I mean, even Mario and stuff, it's an old school platformer and it's fun to pop on once in a while, but after about 5-10 minutes, I normally get frustrated and want to quit.
But we like Crash Bandicoot.
That's fair. I don't know. Crash is a little different for me.
Wasn't Ukulele one of the other ones?
Nah, I have no idea what you're talking about there, Dave. Besides, Crash wasn't always side scroller. Sometimes you went into the screen or out of the screen, depending if you're getting chased by a boulder.
That is very true.
So it
All
wasn't
right.
just 2D.
Well, we are doing The Binding of Isaac. You know of the game, but you've never played the game,
Correct.
right? Do you have any familiarity with Edmund McMillen and his library?
Dave, I can't say that I did. I want to make a joke, but I ain't even got one ready for that.
No uh, Super Meat Boy or Fetus Girl, or
I've heard of Super Meat Boy, actually. Heard of. That's the limit of it. I've heard that it's a thing that exists.
you know that it's a thing that exists.
Yes.
I am a big Edmund McMillen fan. I love his aesthetic. He is dark and creepy and all the things wrong, which is my aesthetic. I love grotesque, I guess is a good way to put it. Uh, he's also a really great subject because he gives abundant interviews. He is not very. He has no qualms about speaking his mind. He's a developer that definitely is in touch with his emotions, and you see that in his gameplay, and that makes him a really fun subject. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. So we've got a story to tell, but before we get there, Rob, why don't you share with our listeners what else happened during the current week in gaming history?
Sure thing. Kicking it off on October 3rd, 1989, Broderbund released Prince of Persia for the Apple II in the United States, marking the debut of Jordan Mentioner's legendary cinematic platformer. Built on rotoscoped animation inspired by films like Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Adventures of Robin Hood, the game stunned players with its lifelike movement and sense of weight. Its premise was simple: escape the dungeon and rescue the princess within an hour. But the precision platforming, deadly traps, and sword duels demanded patience and mastery. Though sales were modest at first, ports to nearly every system of the era cemented its reputation, and it became one of the most influential platformers of all time. We explored its development, Meshner's process of filming his younger brother to capture realistic animation, and its long legacy back in episode 58. So go listen if you
One
want to learn more.
one of the earliest, if not the essential, like animation platformer. One of the essentials. One of the granddaddies of that genre, taking it into new territory with the rotoscoping.
Yeah.
Absolute
Yep.
game changer.
Prince Ali in Persia.
Persia. There you go.
Speaking of Broderbund, in September 30th, 1993, Cyan Worlds and Broderbund released Myst for the Macintosh, and this game would become one of the most iconic and best-selling titles of the 1990s. Myst is a graphic adventure game that transported players to a mysterious and immersive world filled with intricate puzzles and an intriguing storyline. The game stood out for its stunning pre-rendered graphics, atmospheric sound design, and non-linear exploration, allowing players to uncover the story at their own pace. Myst was groundbreaking in its use of CD-ROM technology, pushing the boundary of what video games could achieve in terms of visual and auditory storytelling. The game's success led to numerous ports, sequels, and adaptations, solidifying its legacy as a landmark in the adventure genre and in history. Wow. And in video game history as a whole. We learned about this one back in episode 160, so go check it out if you want to learn more. And I think that's one I actually played.
We learned about the oh god, what HyperCard. It was built on Apple HyperCard, which is like the precursor to multimedia web design, because it was literally like it was like slideshows that you could put links and videos in at a time when that wasn't a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, we learned all about that.
Indeed, we did.
Fun
And
stuff.
speaking of things we've learned, Dave, on a roll today, because on September 29th, 1999, Neversoft and Activision launched Tony Hawk's Pro Skater on the PlayStation in the US and Canada. And this kicked off a phenomenon that would define a generation of gaming. Featuring intuitive controls, realized skaters, and a soundtrack packed with punk and hip hop classics, the game captured skateboarding culture like nothing before it. Its trick based gameplay and combo system set a new standard for sports games, while its influence spilled far beyond gaming, introduced millions of players to skateboarding and music. It became the foundation on one of the most successful franchises of the early 2000s. And if you want to learn more about it, we covered it back in episode 61, so go listen and see what Bruce Willis has to do with it. Right? It was Bruce Willis, right?
It was indeed Bruce Willis. That's my favorite fun fact to tell about video game history. When someone says, "Tell me something interesting about video game history," it's usually that fun fact about Bruce Willis and Tony Hawk, which you'll have to go to the episode to check out.
Indeed. So go listen. Episode 161. Next up, on October 1st, 2002, IO Interactive and Eidos released Hitman 2 Silent Assassin for Windows, PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube in North America. This turned Agent 47 into a household name. Building on the cult following of the first game, this sequel refined the formula with larger, more open levels and multiple approaches to each contract. Players could disguise themselves, slip poison into a drink, or go loud with dual pistols, and their performance was graded on a spectrum from silent assassin to reckless gunman. Its mix of stealth, planning, and improvisation earned widespread acclaim and set the template for the series' future. For many, Silent Assassin was their first introduction to the bald, barcode tattooed assassin, and to this day, it remains one of the most beloved entries in the franchise.
It was a great game. It was like for me that was my introduction for sure. That or no, it was Hitman 2 because Blood Money would have come next. So
Well, I never played it, but I've heard of it. So,
you've never played a Hitman game either?
No.
Okay, cool.
Dave, you should stop being shocked. I haven't seen Airplane. I've never played Hitman. I don't do things.
Fair enough.
Anyway, on to the last game for this week in gaming history. And with that, we have on October 4th, 2011, id Software released Rage for Windows, marking the studio's first new IP since Quake and the debut of its id Tech 5 engine. Set in a post-apocalyptic wasteland after an asteroid impact, Rage blended first-person shooting with vehicular combat and open-world exploration, aiming to expand id's reputation beyond corridor shooters. The game showcased cutting-edge megatexture technology that promised massive, detailed environments without loading screens, but the launch was marred by technical issues on PC. Despite that rocky start, Rage impressed with its crisp gunplay, slick driving mechanics, and a setting that drew comparisons to Mad Max. Critics praised its combat and visuals, but felt the story and open world elements didn't fully deliver on their promise. While it never reached the cultural impact of Doom or Quake, Rage demonstrated id's willingness to innovate and experiment, setting the stage for future projects and even earning a sequel years later.
Yeah, that was one of those that kind of fell flat for me. Like on paper, it has all the things that I like, and then when I played it, it just didn't grab me at all. I never finished either one of them. I tried both of them. I never finished either one. It do be like that sometimes.
Indeed, it do, and to no one's surprise, never played them.
Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure it is
You
not one we
play
played, Dave.
you play very few games, but the ones you do, you play.
I play.
I
Yep.
play a lot of games, and I never finish any of them.
Yeah, I play a game. I make the developers earn their money.
You get
You
your
just
money
give
out of
them
the
money.
game. You get your money out of a game. You think that I enjoyed shopping more than gaming.
Yes, that's a fair way to put it. But hey, I know what I like, and I like what I know. So there you go. But with that, Dave, I think people are here to listen to something else.
Yeah, let's
So
talk about the Binding of Isaac.
let's.
To to understand the Binding of Isaac, you really have to go back and learn and understand its creator, Edmund McMillen. McMillen grew up in a deeply religious Catholic household, and that environment profoundly shaped the way he saw the world. From a young age, he was fascinated by the darker side of religious teachings, the fear of sin, the weight of guilt, and the imagery of heaven and hell. But rather than just absorbing these lessons, he filtered them through his imagination. For McMillen, monsters weren't simply things to fear, they became symbols of his inner struggles and a language through which he could process the world and what was going on around him. Before he even got into video games, McMillen kind of poured his emotions, that imagination, into comics. As a teenager, he created crude but highly personal drawings filled with grotesque creatures, exaggerated anatomy, and raw emotional storytelling. His sketchbooks became diaries, laboratories for turning shame, anxiety, and questions of faith even into, tangible forms that you could see in front of you. He went on to self-publish some of his comics, often blending autobiographical elements with surreal horror, the very thing that one of the things he would become known for as he got into game development. These comics carried this DNA. They carried his ideology, uncomfortable humor, grotesque art that hides vulnerability, and definitely a willingness to confront personal demons head on. But he started in comics, making his monsters, and those monsters on paper wouldn't stay confined to the sketchbooks for long. As the early 2000s rolled in, the indie flash scene opened up new avenues of expression for McMillen. McMillen realized that he could take those same grotesque sketches and surreal ideas and make them interactive, wherein his comics would let people see his world, his games would let people play in it, right? And so he started releasing small flash titles online. Rob, you and I've talked about that before, right? Those early websites that were just a bunch of flash game after flash games. I mean, we talk about Newgrounds, but there were more than just Newgrounds.
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, Newgrounds was the most notable at the time.
Yeah, so he was getting on there and releasing these small flash titles. Sometimes he did it by himself, sometimes he collaborated, and they all had that same theme, carrying this really uncomfortable blend of humor and horror. There were games like Curious Welting, Ether, and Spewer, which all asked players to guide strange, unsettling creatures through hostile environments. These flash games weren't polished in the traditional sense, but they stood out because they looked and felt like nothing else on the market at the time. His art style was and is still very unique. In his games, he was essentially translating the monsters from his notebooks into living, breathing characters. And this early experimental phase taught him two important lessons. The first was that people will connect with highly personal, even disturbing art if it was presented with honesty. And secondly, that gameplay could actually enhance his themes, forcing players to struggle, fail, and push forward, which mirrored the kinds of internal battles that his characters were meant to represent. These lessons would become the backbone of his later work, culminating in Super Meat Boy and ultimately our topic today, The Binding of Isaac. His big breakthrough came in 2010 with Super Meat Boy. This was a collaboration with a programmer named Tommy Refriends. It was built on the foundation of an earlier Flash title, which was simply titled Meat Boy. And Meat Boy turned his signature grotesque style into something surprisingly charming. In this series, you as a player control a skinless cube of meat, splattering blood across walls as you race through what is an incredibly punishing platformer to rescue Meat Boy's girlfriend, Bandage Girl, from the villainous Dr. Fetus.
What the fuck?
Right?
Okay.
On paper and in words, it sounds absolutely absurd, right?
Yes,
But
most definitely.
in practice, it's a good game. It's a revelation. The controls in Super Meat Boy are razor tight. The level design is deviously clever, and the presentation is dripping with both humor and challenge. Now, admittedly, McMillen has come out and said he did some things just to do some things, like There are gross scenes like someone's taking a number two in the thing that he just put in there just to see if he could get away with it. So he likes to push the boundaries of appropriateness. I mean, he doesn't like to push the boundaries. He freaking leaps 10 feet like it was a skyscraper and he was Superman over the boundary that is appropriateness, you know?
Mm-hmm. Sounds like it.
Super Meat Boy became a critical and commercial success. It earned accolades from major outlets and it sold over 1 million copies. Its success was amplified by McMillen's prominent appearance in the documentary Indie Game the Movie, which highlights both his eccentric personality and his commitment to make games that weren't uniquely his own. I remember when that movie came out the first time, I rewatched it to do this episode. It is still really great documentary about early indie hits such as Super Meat Boy and Braid and World of Goo. There's just these early ones. They're fantastic. It's a great documentary if you don't know it. Really great line of sight into McMillen here. The success of Super Meat Boy gave him something that he hadn't really had before, which was security. Right now, he had financial security. He finally had a hit, a successful hit. Right,
Right.
with that pressure off his shoulders, McMillen suddenly had the freedom to experiment again, to chase smaller, more personal ideas about whatever he wanted without worrying about whether or not they'd find an audience, right? Because once the money part was gone, he could just make the game he wanted to make. He didn't have to make it to pay the bills anymore. I mean, he literally like it's crazy. I mean, literally, Super Meat Boy sold over 1 million copies. Like they bought their house outright and like they hit it with that one. Like that, you know, that's part of the indie game, the movie, is to enjoy the success of it, right?
I mean, why not? If you did well, enjoy.
You know that was when he made it. That was when he broke into the mainstream, and because Super Meat Boy was released on Xbox Live Arcade, it was one of those early successes on that platform. It was also the first time he had developed for a console, so there was a lot of things riding on that process. And you know, it talks about how people were like looked at that game and they were grossed out by it, and they're like, "Oh, you're gonna sell like 3,000 copies," and then it comes out and they sell like 30,000 the first day or something like that. So
Yeah, damn. That's
it
impressive.
it was it's that part of his story is incredibly impressive and interesting, and I highly recommend Any Game the Movie to anyone who would like to learn a little bit more about that little period of time when indie market was in its infancy. Now having freedom to do what he wanted, it was kind of that. It was in that spirit of creative freedom that the Binding of Isaac began to take form. One of McMillen's key collaborators during his Flash indie era was a man named Florian Himsl, and Florian was a programmer that he had met in the Flash scene. The pair had worked together in 2008 on a game called Coil, which was this strange, unsettling game where players guided a fetus through abstract sequences using unconventional mouse controls. One weird thing about it, I remember about Coil, it confused a lot of people because there's no, like, you load up the game, there's no start button. There's literally a circle that has dots going around it, and the thing is, you're supposed to trace your mouse around the circle. And there were a lot of people that were bashing the game in reviews and saying, "I don't know how to start the game." So, um, yeah, I mean, Edmund likes to do different things.
That's funny. It's, definitely have had games like that where you start and you're like, what do I do? I don't get it. This game sucks. I quit.
This, like so much of other McMillen's work, really blurred the line between interactive art and traditional gameplay. Coil really set the tone for their partnership. Edmund provided his unique brand of deeply personal, grotesque imagery, and Florian translated, the game into functional code and programming a game that people could could do. So Himsl had this ability to structure McMillen's chaos into playable systems, and that made him frankly a perfect partner for this experimental period that followed. So when McMillen decided to try another quick project after Super Meat Boy, he called Himsl. Actually, he called Tommy Refriends first, but Tommy Refriends was like on vacation or something. So then he called Florian Himsl.
Nice. Love that.
But you know what? It's really interesting because the two have totally different styles, and chances are it would have been two totally different games. So that was just the way it was meant to be, right?
Yeah, no, you got a point there.
It's just the way it was meant to be. Their plan, frankly, was simple. They wanted to spend a couple of weeks making something weird, disposable, and honest. That project became The Binding of Isaac. From the outset, McMillen knew that Isaac wasn't just going to be another dungeon crawler. It was a chance for him to wrestle with the duality of religion in his own life. On his mother's Catholic side, faith was ritualistic and symbolic. Candles were lit for the dead, prayers were given for safe passage, bread and wine were transformed into body and blood. If you're Catholic, this is pretty standard, right?
Yeah, that it is.
To young Edmund, those rituals were strangely magical, even inspiring. But on his father's side, there were born again Christian relatives that were far less forgiving. They condemned him for playing Dungeons and Dragons or Magic the Gathering. They even confiscated his Magic the Gathering cards and warned him that he was going to hell.
Oh, wow. Very nice. Love that.
That mix of inspiration and condemnation, of beauty and fear, uh, really became the heart of Isaac's story. I wanted Isaac to embody this duality I experienced with religion, McMillen later explained. The self hate and isolation it instilled in me, but also the dark creativity it inspired. McMillen was unflinching about the heavy subject matter. In another interview, he said, "A lot of the content in Isaac is extremely dark and adult. It touches on aspects of child abuse, gender identity, infanticide, neglect, suicide, abortion, and how religion might negatively affect a child. I wanted to talk about him in a way that I was comfortable with, through dark humor and satire." But Isaac wasn't built on themes alone. McMillen also wanted the gameplay to reflect the games that he loved as a child. The most obvious influence for The Binding of Isaac is The Legend of Zelda. He's described in interviews the moment that he first wandered into a dungeon in the original NES Zelda as one of the most formative experiences of his gaming life. Stepping into a series of dark, mysterious rooms, never knowing what kind of monsters or treasures might wait inside. That sense of discovery became the backbone of Isaac's level design. What made the formula really sing with your themes and your level design was the addition of a roguelike structure. Rather than carefully crafted dungeons that played the same way every time, Himsl stitched together a procedural generation that randomized rooms, enemies, and items, ensuring that each descent into Isaac's basement felt fresh. Death wasn't the end in their game plan, it was part of a loop. It forced players to dive back in, discover new item synergies, and kind of embrace chaos, so to speak, right? By combining Zelda's rune by rune exploration with roguelike unpredictability and twin stick shooting mechanics, McMillen and Himsl, they really created a package that mirrored both the chaos of McMillen's themes and the structure of Himsl's code. And all of this started as more than, it was just a 2-week experiment. That was all they were shooting for in the beginning. Flash, because they were still building on Flash at the time, it really allowed them to build quickly. And it was only going to be a 2-week project, so the roughness of their build kind of matched McMillen's low expectations. He assumed most players would reject the crude art style and provocative themes, but as they continued to work for McMillen and Himsl, the project kept growing. The item system in particular became addictive to design. Every new pickup kind of twisted Isaac's body or abilities in grotesque, fascinating ways, and soon they wanted to. They literally found they added hundreds of them, right? The random dungeon generator kept producing fresh permutations, and the deeper they went, the harder it was to treat it like a throwaway game. McMillen later admitted what was supposed to be disposable ended up defining a genre revival. I designed it to fail.
Oh, nice.
It was a
Love to hear that.
2 week game jam. Literally, it was just going to be a 2 week game jam. That as they sat down and said, we're going to make this weird game. I mean, it's literally about an abused child who gets shoved into his basement. Like you're literally like going through the basement, and all these creatures he goes into are sins personified, and his feelings personified. I mean, the enemies are literally like sloth and gluttony, and like the bosses. I mean, are like literally the sins, right? Like this whole game is built around religious imagery, and it's essentially like this kid gets abused by mom, gets shoved into his basement, and now he's got to fight all the demons in his basement slash imagination. You know what I mean?
I mean, yeah, but just because it's built on religious aspects doesn't mean it's bad. Case in
No,
point, Dante's
no,
Inferno.
not bad. This is not bad at all. But they just, like I said, 2 week game jam. It was going to be a 2 week game jam. They weren't making it to amount to anything. Hadn't really planned on marketing it. It was just going to be another flash game that they were going to spend 2 weeks on, something to take a break from the commercial stuff, and then push it out into the universe.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is by the time it was ready for release in late 2011, The Binding of Isaac had kind of become something far larger than either of its creators had imagined. The only question left was how players would respond to such a raw, unsettling package. Rob, Isaac had to crawl through dark basements, fight monsters, and face his fears just to have his story told. Thankfully, getting your own voice out into the world doesn't have to be nearly that scary.
Yeah, I'd rather start a podcast than dodge tears and giant flies. But isn't podcasting a pain to set up?
Not with Zencaster, it's the all-in-one podcasting solution. You just log in through your browser, hit record, and you're capturing studio quality audio and up to 4K video. No fancy setup required.
Well, that sounds better than hiding in a chest. But what if something crashes?
Zencaster's got you covered with multi-layer backups, so even if your connection drops, you'll still have the highest quality files safe and sound.
Okay, but I say every other sentence. That can't sound good.
It's like every third sentence, to be fair.
Okay.
But that's where Zencaster's post-production comes in. It automatically removes filler words, balances audio, and scrubs background noise so you sound polished every time.
Alright, fine. But once I've got my episode ready, how do I get it out there?
Well, that's the best part. Zencaster also helps you publish directly to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the major platforms. Everything from recording to distribution happens all in one place.
You know, that does sound easier than Isaac's journey. So, how can I sign up?
Just go to Zencaster, zencastr.com/pricing and use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane. You'll get 30% off the first month of any Zencaster paid plan. Whether it's your first episode or your 100th, Zencaster makes it simple to share your story.
And no boss fights required. Now, back to Isaac's basement.
The Binding of Isaac released on Steam in September of 2011 with little fanfare, but it quickly became a breakout hit. Funny little anecdote about that. So, this game originally came out before Steam was what it is today, right? And I mean, like, now it's easy to get your game on Steam if you're an independent distributor. But when The Binding of Isaac came out in 2011, this was before that was a thing. And so McMillen and them made this game, thought this game was going to be really good, and got the idea that, hey, we're going to try to sell it, right? So Edmund calls up this guy he knows from Steam that he probably met through either Super Meat Boy or whatever, and he basically he called them and he's like, "Hey, we have this game. Da, 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 da. we're making it in Flash, but we're gonna package it in an executable so people can play it. And I wanna, what do you think about releasing it on the Steam store? And the guy was like, okay, here's the here's your code, because they had to give them permission back then. And then McMillen hung up the phone. He's like, I felt like I had just gotten away with murder. So, like, I guess he thought that he wasn't going to get it. And it was so easy when the guy was like, okay, here you go. And he was like, excuse me? Within the Binding of Isaac's first month, it had sold more than 50,000 copies. That's far beyond McMillen's expectations for, his throwaway project, so to speak. By November of 2012, a year later, sales had surpassed 1 million copies. And at least a quarter of those players also purchased the first expansion, which we'll talk about in a moment. By July of 2014, 3 years in, that Flash version, original Flash version, sold over 3 million copies. So 1 million copies a year is what it sold in its first 3 years.
That ain't too bad.
Not bad at all for a 2-week game jam.
Not at all.
Players really latched on to its replayability. Every run was different. Every item combination unpredictable, and its grotesque mutations made sharing stories of bizarre playthroughs half the fun. And so what I mean by that is every time you pick up an item, it modifies your character in some way. There are items that give you horns. There are items that turn you into a cyclops. There are items that make you big and small. There are items that make you grotesque in certain ways. There's just item after item after item, and they don't always replace one another. Sometimes they build on another. So part of the fun is all these weird combinations of your character, and also like weird combinations that make the gameplay easy, right? Because sometimes you on a run and you get crappy items and it's really hard, and other times you get god tier items and it makes it real easy and fun.
Yeah, that's true.
The Binding of Isaac thrived on word of mouth, and it really became a favorite among streamers and YouTubers of the time. It was fun to showcase its unpredictable chaos, and that really kind of turned it into a cult phenomenon. Critics, though, were a little more divided. Many showered praise on its addictive mechanics, dark humor, and roguelike depth, while others that really didn't like that crude presentation and felt that it relied too much on shock value. Eurogamer, for instance, called it a triumph of independent creativity, whereas IGN described it as equal parts repulsive and compulsive, which is
nice.
fantastic. And reality is that tension between attraction and discomfort really became part of the game's identity. The controversy around its religious themes only really served to amplify its notoriety. By January of 2012, roughly, when sales were about at 450,000 units, McMillen was approached by Nintendo to bring Isaac to Nintendo. It might not have been Nintendo, but he was approached by a publisher that wanted to bring the Binding of Isaac to the Nintendo 3DS. He was initially really intrigued by the concept, but red flags quickly came up given Nintendo's, conservative reputation. We know all about that. McMillen later explained that Germany's ratings board had classified Isaac as age 16 plus for potentially blasphemous content. That is the first time a game had ever been ruled with that type of content in the board's history. And he believed that specific rating influenced Nintendo's stance, and they nixed the project. Executives later told him that some blasphemous material might have been tolerable, but overtly religious themes really crossed the line. At one point, he was even asked if he would consider altering the content to make the game more suitable, but he was never given specifics. He was never given specifics, so it never really got any further. In the end, McMillen said that he kind of speculated that Nintendo feared reputational risk. Because Isaac so clearly resembles The Legend of Zelda, there's probably a concern there that an unsuspecting child might download it if they expected an adventure like Link's, only to find themselves staring down disturbing imagery of abuse, sacrifice, and fanaticism. Wow, words we hear every day and I can't even say them.
I wouldn't say it's a word we hear every day, Dave.
Fanaticism nowadays? For McMillen, that rejection was strangely validating. It was destined to fail, he said in an interview, but instead, the Binding of Isaac became impossible to ignore. What began as a 2-week experiment had turned into a genre-defining success story, credited with helping to spark a roguelite revival that would fuel later indie hits like FTL and Don't Starve. Now, the first major step in Isaac's growth came with the Binding of Isaac's expansion, The Wrath of the Lamb, which was released in May of 2012. McMillen had said that he was inspired to create the first expansion not just because of the base game's unexpected success, but because his wife Danielle had played it all the way through, something she had never done with any of his previous work. That specific encouragement led him to expand Isaac in a way that he hadn't originally planned. Wrath of the Lamb added an astonishing 70% more content to the game. It included more than 10 new bosses, over 100 additional items, more than 40 new unlocks, and even 2 new endings. Players could now encounter alternate floor paths that swapped out the normal dungeons for tougher versions, complete with harder enemies and unique bosses, like New Game Plus. The expansion also introduced trinkets, which were items that grant passive abilities or trigger effects while carried. And there were, new level types, optional levels, so on and so forth. It was in every sense a massive update that transformed Isaac from a quirky indie experience into more of a fully fleshed out roguelike. But the reality is with these two, with the original game and the expansion, both of them really pushed Flash to its breaking point, right? McMillen planned more content, planned a second expansion, but the truth is that the gaming engine they built on top of Flash couldn't successfully handle more content without collapsing under its own weight. Wrath of the Lamb was successful, but it also had, served to make it clear that Isaac had kind of outgrown its original form, and that set the stage for a full remake that would come later. Flash had been a convenient tool for rapid prototyping, but the engine was never really designed to support the sheer amount of content that McMillen Himsl had now crammed into it. So bugs, performance issues, and compatibility problems now piled up, and so any hope of expanding the game kind of went up in smoke with the technical limitations. And so the solution came in the form of a full remake. Partnering with another developer, McMillen rebuilt the game from the ground up as The Binding of Isaac Rebirth, which released in November of 2014. Rebirth replaced Flash with a custom engine, allowing smoother performance, native controller support, and the ability to add far, far, far more content. They shifted the visual style to a retro-inspired 16-bit aesthetic, closer to the NES, or more specifically the SNES games that had inspired McMillen to make this in the first place. Rebirth wasn't just a facelift. It bundled in all the content from the original game and The Wrath of Lamb, while also adding hundreds of new items and enemies and bosses and adding new secrets. With the new engine, McMillen had the flexibility to keep building on it indefinitely, and the community that had already grown around Isaac really suddenly had a sturdier foundation to dive into. The remake was a massive success. Critics praised its tighter controls, smoother performance, and the mountain of content added. Players, on the other hand, really embraced Rebirth as the definitive version of Isaac. And since the foundation was laid, Binding of Isaac did not stop with Rebirth. Over the next several years, Isaac grew even larger through expansions. Afterbirth arrived in 2015, adding more than 100 new items, new transformations, and an entirely new mode called Greed mode. 2 years later, Afterbirth Plus followed, expanding the game yet again, while introducing official mod support, which allowed the community to start adding on to it, creating their own items, enemies, and even entire campaigns. And at
Wow.
that point, Isaac expands. It's no longer just a game, right? It becomes a platform, a content creation platform, so to speak. Finally, in 2021, McMillen releases Repentance, which is a massive expansion that integrates content from a fan made mod called Afterbirth, while adding hundreds of new items, alternate foreplasts, and new bosses of his own. Uh, Repentance was marketed as the quote unquote final version of the game, and that brought Isaac up to a staggering scale. There are more than 700 items and enough combinations of said items to keep players discovering new interactions for years and years and years to follow. What, again, I'll say it, what began as a 2 week flash experiment with the release of Repentance had now become a decade spanning franchise, constantly reinventing itself, growing alongside its community, and really cementing its place as one of the most expansive roguelites ever made. Still one of the highest rated roguelites to this day. And while The Binding of Isaac became McMillen's defining work, it certainly wasn't the end of his story. After Rebirth and its expansions cemented the game as a modern classic, McMillen continued to explore new ideas. In 2017, he returned to the world of Super Meat Boy with Super Meat Boy Forever, though this time he stepped back into more of a creative role while others led his development. Around this time, he released a game called The End Is Nigh, a bleak and punishing platformer that also carries his, signature humor and challenging design. He returns to card-based strategy with The Legend of Bumbo in 2019, which is a prequel to Isaac that experiments with puzzle mechanics and deck building, but also keeps that strange sense of personality that Isaac had. And in recent years, McMillen has continued to work on new projects, often teasing the ideas, teasing ideas that blur the line between traditional games and deeply personal art. I'm interested in one he's working on, Rob, called Meowgenics, which is exactly what it sounds like.
Right up your alley, Dave.
Creepy cats breeding.
Yep, that's right up your alley.
Edmund McMillen's post Isaac catalog hasn't reached the same cultural footprint as Isaac did, but it still reflects the same themes and style that have always defined McMillen's work. Dark humor, grotesque imagery, and mechanics that force players to wrestle with the consequences of their actions, facing their struggles, so to speak. More than anything, McMillen has remained committed to his original vision to make games that are personal, that are challenging, and genuinely unlike anything else in the video game medium. That brings us up to date with Edmund McMillen's career, one that began with sketchbooks full of monsters and grew into some of the most influential indie games of the past 2 decades. If you'd like to dive deeper into this story, you can always find today's episode along with a lot of other episodes on our website at www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can people find on our website?
You can find a calendar of our future episode topics, see what we're going to be talking about in our coming weeks. You can find a link to our Discord page where you can come talk with Dave and I about episode topics or other gaming related topics. You can find a link to our Patreon where you can help support us and get access to ad-free and unedited versions of all of our episodes. And you can find links to our social media where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is Wrong. Each week, we'll tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game, a technology, a console, a person, a company. We've done it on places before too. Just have to make it relevant to this week. We'll tell you each story. We hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Each week, when we sit down to do research on new topics, we find new things. That's like my favorite part. Not even gonna lie, that's my favorite part. Every week when I sit down and do research for a new episode, I like learning new things. I dig and I dig and I dig and I dig, trying to find something I didn't know about this game before. It's exciting because if I didn't know about it, chances are a lot of you didn't know about it, and I genuinely like bringing it to the table. I like teaching you new things. It's this fantastic cycle of teaching and learning, learning and teaching. And in celebration of said cycle, we like to go roundtable and talk about our takeaways. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Well, Dave, it's going to be a pretty obvious one for me, and I'm sure it's probably pretty close to yours too. I mean, we're talking about a game that did extremely well that was made in 2 weeks. We've talked about games that were in development for years and done worse than this game that was made in 2 weeks. And that's absolutely just mind boggling. Like, I can't fathom that. How something was done so quickly, even it was such a simple concept and it did so well. And we have games that were made by like double A, triple A title companies that just absolutely flopped, you know?
Yeah,
So it's great to hear. But it's like I said, it's mind blowing. I can't put it any other way. It's mind blowing to me. So that's my big takeaway is just how well the game did for how quickly it was made. What about yourself?
I didn't know that this wasn't supposed to be anything special, right? Um, if you play Binding of Isaac, it's hard to. I know I talked a lot about its inspiration, its religious imagery. You can't play the game and not see that religious imagery. I mean, it's literally a game built around it, and it's easy to recognize that. I mean, it's easy to recognize it. So that wasn't new, but I didn't. I never knew that this was just going to be a. It was a 2 week game jam that he wanted to take a break from making anything important after all the time and energy he put into Super Meat Boy. And so he got together with Himsl and he's like, hey, let's just make whatever for fun. And it turned into this, which for me is his defining game at this point. It would have been Super Meat Boy at one time, but I think Binding of Isaac has surpassed that personally. Um, it's funny to me that it took getting the heat off his back for him to come to this place to be able to make this, right? It wasn't until he finished Meat Boy and he didn't have the pressure on him and he said, let me make what I want to make for me. And he made something deeply personal. And that is the basis of the Binding of Isaac, which, like I said, that's not only a defining game in for him, that's a defining game for the roguelike genre too. It's just funny how things like that work out sometimes, you know?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So that's my takeaway. All right, Rob. Well, before I take it out of here and look into next week, is there anything you'd like to add to today's episode?
I will just take a quick moment to say thank you so much to everyone for listening. It means the world to us to have you along, and we hope that you enjoy getting to learn about all of these topics with Dave and I. And if not, well, thanks for giving us listens anyway.
That is a valid point. That brings us to the end of our descent into the basement of the Binding of Isaac. At its core, this game was never just about dodging bullets and collecting power ups, it was an exorcism, a personal exploration of faith, trauma, and the messy contradictions that come with growing up in a world of strict beliefs. McMillen took those childhood fears, dressed them in grotesque humor, and handed them to players as a challenge. Survive the basement, face the monsters, and see what comes out on the other side. What began as a 2 week experiment in Flash became a decade long journey of expansions, remakes, and reinventions. Along the way, Isaac didn't just carve out a cult following, it helped reignite the roguelike renaissance, inspired a wave of indie developers, and proved that games could be deeply personal without sacrificing playability. In the end, Isaac's story reminds us that sometimes the smallest, strangest projects can resonate the loudest. It asks us to consider the shadows we carry, the fears we inherit, and the ways we might transform them into something new. And maybe that's why the basement still calls players back after all these years. Because deep down, it isn't just Isaac's demons we're fighting, it's our own.
Whoa.
I know, right?
Damn, man.
That's got to be the best wrap up I've ever written.
Probably, yeah.
Next week, we're stepping out of the haunting depths of the Binding of Isaac and embarking on the vibrant journey of Enslaved Odyssey to the West. Released in 2010, this action adventure reimagined the classic Chinese legend Journey to the West within a post apocalyptic world, blending emotional storytelling with dynamic content and platforming. From its stunning art direction to its compelling characters, Enslaved proved that even overlooked gems could leave a lasting impact. Join us as we explore its history, design, and legacy on next week's epic trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Skibby dim 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 button do.